The character of Judas in the New Testament stories of Jesus is simultaneously famous and infamous. For Bob Dutko, Christian apologist and radio talk show host, Judas's betrayal of Jesus was foretold in the ancient Hebrew scriptures, providing proof that the Bible is true.
It's prophesied that the Messiah would be betrayed by a close friend. Psalm 41:9, as well as Psalm 55:12, Zechariah 13:6, all say this. And of course, this was prophesying about Judas, who was a close friend who did betray him.
Is that right? Did these verses from the Hebrew Bible really record prophecies of a future betrayal of the Messiah by a close friend? Are these passages specifically prophecies? Are they about a future Messiah? Should we simply take the apologist's word for it that they were fulfilled by Judas? Fact is, none of these passages are about a future Messiah. When read by apologists, many of the details surrounding the plucked passages used to support the claim that they are in reference to Judas are simply ignored. For example, while verse 9 of Psalm 41 reads, "Even my close friend, someone I trusted, one who shared my bread, has turned against me," and certainly could be seen as applying to Judas's betrayal of Jesus, the psalmist earlier laments about being ill and cries out for healing. In fact, the entire psalm is about a person suffering from disease. Verse 8 has enemies of the psalmist murmur, "A vile disease has afflicted him. He will never get up from the place where he lies." If this is supposedly a psalm in reference to Jesus, when was Jesus recorded in the New Testament as having a vile disease? The psalmist goes on further to confess that his illness is the result of sin committed against Yahweh. You'd be hard-pressed to find any Christian apologist who will support the idea that Jesus sinned against God. In the closing verses of the psalm, the sickened author begs Yahweh to heal him so he can rise up and take vengeance on his turncoat friends. There is nothing about Psalm 41 about a future Messiah, the sinless Son of God, and his betrayal by Judas. Psalm 55 is a similar song of lament, this time about enemies besieging the author. He writes of his misery, "My heart is in anguish within me. The terrors of death have fallen on me. Fear and trembling have beset me. Horror has overwhelmed me." Bemoaning violence which besieges his city and enemies who insult him, the psalmist writes the passage apologists believe is a prophetic reference to Judas. "It is not enemies who taunt me. I could bear that. It is not adversaries who deal insolently with me. I could hide from them. But it is you, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend." But immediately following, the psalmist requests of God, "Let death take my enemies by surprise. Let them go down alive to the realm of the dead, for evil finds lodging among them." Was this request for vengeance from Christ somehow missed by the authors of the New Testament? Clearly, this psalm is not a prophecy concerned with a future Messiah and his betrayal by one of his closest friends. As noted by biblical scholar C.S. Rodd in the Oxford Bible Commentary, the psalm instead is likely about a king beset by foreign enemies and hostility within his own city, and with the head of a neighboring state now become his adversary. We have to recall what was discussed in episode 29 regarding the use of psalms as prophecy. The evangelists were borrowing a practice already well established in other sects of first-century Judaism. The Psalms had come to be thought of as prophetic, even though in their original compositions such a designation was never intended, because David himself had come to be thought of as a prophet. Other Jewish sects, like the Qumran community responsible for the Dead Sea Scrolls, picked through the ancient and not-so-ancient Psalms in search of passages which could be thought of as prophetic, and stretched them to fit current circumstances, assuring or reassuring community members of their role in God's greater plan for humanity, and their unique part in it. It didn't matter if the context from which the passages were taken didn't really fit, nor were intended to fit the current circumstance to which the passages were being applied. It mattered only that the connection could be made, even at the expense of ignoring the original context of the psalm from which the verse or verses was taken. So, if neither Psalm 41 nor Psalm 55 were prophetic visions about Judas's betrayal of Christ, but were instead simple laments in the tradition of Hebrew poetry, then there was no prophecy to fulfill. Zechariah 13, however, is another story. It is without question a prophecy, but read in context it clearly cannot be a prophecy about Jesus or his betrayal by Judas. The prophecy actually begins in chapter 12 and is specified to be concerned with Israel itself, not a future Messiah. It speaks of a coming day when Judah and Jerusalem will be attacked, when all the nations of the earth are gathered against her. On that day the Lord will make Jerusalem an immovable rock, and anyone who tries to move it will injure themselves. On that day, the prophecy claims Yahweh will strike every horse with panic and its rider with madness. Furthermore, on that day it is said Yahweh will shield those who live in Jerusalem, so that the feeblest among them will be like David, and the house of David will be like God, like the angel of the Lord going before them. And most impressively on that day, Yahweh will set out to destroy all the nations that attack Jerusalem. The prophecy then continues in chapter 13, where, according to the Christian apologists, we are to encounter mention of the Messiah and his betrayal by a close friend, a reference to Jesus and Judas. Instead, we read that on the same day the nations of the world rise up against Jerusalem and suffer destruction at the hand of Yahweh, a fountain will be opened to the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to cleanse them from sin and impurity. On that day, Yahweh promises to banish the names of the idols from the land, so that they will be remembered no more. The prophecy concludes by having Yahweh proclaim he will remove both the prophets and the spirit of impurity from the land, and if anyone still prophesies, their father and mother to whom they were born will say to them, "You must die, because you have told lies in the Lord's name." Then their own parents will stab the one who prophesies. On that day, every prophet will be ashamed of their prophetic vision. They will not put on a prophet's garment of hair in order to deceive. Each will say, "I am not a prophet, I am a farmer. The land has been my livelihood since my youth." If someone asks, "What are these wounds on your body?" they will answer, "The wounds I was given at the house of my friends." According to the apologists, that last line of the prophecy is supposed to be the reference to Judas's betrayal of Jesus, but clearly in the context of the Zechariah prophecy itself, this is impossible. The one wounded is a former prophet, one who was stabbed by their parents, and it's not a reference to a single prophet, but to all of the former prophets of the land. The shame of their former profession, a profession that has been removed by Yahweh, has caused them to lie about where their wounds have come from. Instead of admitting their former profession, they lie instead and say they have been lifelong farmers and about receiving wounds at the house of friends. Again, what we have here are not prophecies fulfilled, but passages taken out of original contexts. How this argues for the truth of the Bible is anyone's guess. Funding for this program was provided in part by the generous contributions of viewers like you via Patreon. Consider joining them at www.patreon.com/Bible Skeptic. Thank you.